Hello everyone, Alex is here. Let's talk about anti-patterns of JavaScript. Let's start with our first one until we'll reach the end one. Script.js file that you can see on here, and believe me, that will be a little trick for you to discover how does it work, and wait until the end when we'll discover that little bit more. Or there will be a challenge. Let's check. Firstly, let's go with our first example. It's global stating. So the problem that could be it's when you can mutate globally your object. It's good and bad in the same time, because you should really understand when you should do that. Because first problem is, when you globally mutates your object, you can unexpectedly change something that should not be changed. For example, you would like to have changes on your, for example, a cabinet for video editing, but because of you had mutated the object globally, for example, you wanted to store some actions to be able to redo them, you globally changed your video, for example, and you cannot redo some changes back. So when you're working with global stating, you should really understand what and why you wanted to change for. And sometimes it's better to encapsulate and imitate states. So for that, you should just create new objects. So here you can see an example when you have user, then you're taking key of the user, updating the name, and it will be updated globally. It doesn't matter, it's inside of the function, inside of the loop, it could be even inside of another file, but if you're working with modules, so a lot of JavaScript files that can be modeled into one big one, it will be also changed globally. And globally changing are really more heavy due to sometimes when you're working with frameworks, they can be reactive and they can update a lot of the things, for example, that you don't want to. So that's not a rule that you always should work not globally. No, I just warn you to be ready for global changing. And for encapsulated, imitated, you just should return a new object. For example, here we're taking 3 dots. It means that we're taking all of the information that has been in our user object and adding a new name. So in this case, we're updating the old one with our new one. And if we have some additional fields, they will stay the same. So that's the first that you should be ready for, working with global stating. Let's go for our second one. And second one is about working with strategy map. And this one, if we'll be comparing that to the previous one, is more working and more important. So anti-pattern is working with long if-else statements chains. And I think that you had that code in your history when you have been working something like that. So you have been checking if type student will return this one, if type this one will return this one. The problem here is this chain of things works harder and longer, and moreover, it's harder to work on with. For example, you can also work with switch case statements, where you're just comparing type. But remember, when you're working with if-else switch case, it's better not working with one value that will be changed. It's better to work with logic. So if-else statement, and you have some different logic, some new mutations, some filtering, some actions that are working, in switch case the same. And when you're working with specific values, for example, in our cases, we are working with discounts, So we're just map getting them, we're taking the keys of them, for example, student, senior, veteran, and we're comparing like which value we will have, for example, 02, 03, 025. This way will be much better because in this way it's shorter, it's more understandable, and in general you can not working, for example, with map. Map is, I think, better way here, but you can work with simple object. It will be easier way, and yeah, that will work better. That's called strategy map because it will be faster. Faster because if-else statements they're working here not so fast because they're checking each of the condition, while here we are filtering, finding the specific value that we want to find on, because here we don't know what we're trying to find. Here we know, and it's faster. And yeah, so use strategy map when you wanna to just change one specific value and to have conditions where this value will be different. Strategy map. Uncontrolled async. So when you're working with fetching data, so it can be also working with async functions. Mostly it's about fetching data. So we can see the first idea when we have, for example, loading, then if something is loading, we'll return that. If it's not, like we're continuing and fetching data. Then, for example, if data was fetched, return false, and then we just return the data. The problem here is that firstly, we're not checking what we have with our fetch, because fetch can be failed, for example. It can be not failed. And in general, the problem is when we wanted to fetch something else, we're waiting for our alt request. So this is key difference here with this example and the example below. Remember, the first request is not so important as the second one, or just the next one. So the latest is more important. An example for you, when you're searching something on Google, Facebook, YouTube, doesn't matter. And can you imagine when you're typing something to find, it blocks your next request. For example, you wanted to find programmer video. You're typing P, it's trying to find something. You're trying to write R, but you cannot. You're waiting until that request will be ended. Then you can write R. And that's with all of the letters. And that's the problem. And even if, for example, we won't block input, we'll be even to write all of the sentence at once, programmer video, and it will be blocking all the other requests, and we'll try still to work with the first one and blocking all of the others. It will still just return you the result of just writing P in Google search. And here is the solution. Remember, the last one is always more important than the first one. So we should abort the request for the earlier requests. So, and here we have the controller, abort controller for safe cancellation, and you can see that we have controller, for example. We're aborting that, we're taking the new controller, and here's the thing. If we have already the controller, so it's not null, we're taking that and aborting that. What does it mean? It will cancel the previous request that we have done with this thing, so signal will help us to close it up. Here we're taking that signal from our controller, putting that into our fetch, and we can control when we can abort that. Then we have catch. So what will be with our catch? Mostly when we're aborting request, we'll get exception. And this exception can be easily ignored because it was manually removed because of the user has created a new request and the old one is not so important right now. So that's okay to cancel that, to check that error. And we have other error that we can through, for example, we use to discover what's going on, or we can just console that, log that, and discover later or just made prompt or alert or a new page with errors, so it doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want. And finally, when we have the result of that, so added, we can empty our controller because it's not longer important. We cannot abort it because it was already been executed. So that's why we are writing controller when we're just creating request. You were making the new request, it will be cancelled, aborted here, and if it was done through all of the states, we can work with that fully. So that's an important working here with abort controller. So remember, the last one is always more important than the first one. Sometimes we wanna not mutate array, so we're working with object, but here it will be working a little bit the same, but a little bit different also. So when we're working push and all of the methods to work with our arrays, and even if we'll creating const new and override this one, we'll have our list for new to-do, for example, const new to-dos. But the problem here that it'll be the same one array. So we have array this one, and here it will be under the reference to this one. And changing this one will also change original one. So that's the thing when you should work with immutable updates. For that, just remember creating a new list, a new object that won't be synced with your original one. It just fully created from the new. So just writing, for example, a new array, just new square brackets. And remember, you just should write in the beginning 3 dots that cause the spread, and you're adding your main list that you wanted to continue working with. So in this very way, it will create a new array and they won't be synchronized. And if you want, for example, to create redo function, for example, or the previous list, this one way can help you working with what you wanted to. DOM updates. And +1 DOM updates. This flow won't work good for you. So an idea here is quite easy. You have items, you're creating div, you're putting text inside of the div based on which text we have on our items, and we're appending that into our body or any other element on our page. And what is the problem? It triggers reflow each time. So each time we're going through this list, we're triggering this reflowing and regeneration. And 3 of them, it's not hard, but can you imagine when you're working that consistently and you're working with more than 3 elements? It can damage working with your generation of web page. So that's not a good idea. Right now we have a thing that calls fragment. And let's check it out. So batch DOM update. You're working with these items. You're creating create document fragment. So we have the fragment of our document. So it's not like virtual DOM, but it's something similar. You just create a fragment of the document that we have and just puts the data into that, but not updating our flow, our main document, and not regenerate our view, not painting all of the elements. So we have items, we're going the same way, we're taking the creating element the same way, text intent, but here's the difference. We're appending shell into our fragment. And then that fragment will put only one time in our body and it will reflow it only one time. So that's the crucial bit here. And for example, from React 18, you can use that. It is being used on the core base. So earlier, everyone have been using this one method, but right now it's anti-pattern and you should use batch update. That is based on the create document fragment and being updated only once on your document body. That will crucially be good for your application, especially when you are changing, adding a lot of elements quite often, and especially with batch updating. This one based for React mostly. And in general, React-based syntaxes, you can see here that you can work, for example, with mutation state directly, and that bad pattern here, you just, for example, taking items and pushing new one. It won't be reactive. Just go with an idea that has been written on documentation for a specific framework. If they have reactivity statements that is based on the use state, for example, as it has been done on React, you just should use this one. So we're having use state, we're adding that, we're having previous one, and we're creating a new list that is being based on our previous one, this one, and we're adding the value new. So that's not so often the problem, but you should understand here when you should re-render your DOM and when not. And that's the crucial. So when you want to re-render that, use, how does it call? It calls reactive. Yeah, reactive states, reactive ways of working for this specific way. If you wanna just update the object, array, you can use the first one, but be sure that it will be executed on the JavaScript side and won't be rendering on the React side. And based on what we are working right now, most of us developers, it's not so typical way. Most of the things that we are trying to work is the things that we'll be rendering, and most of the things that you will be using on the core base of your applications, basically it's better to put to the backend, but I don't know the situation, so of course there is a way, so just quite often when you should not render some things, but should update them on the list. But that depends on what you wanted to work on with, so, but take that in mind to use state getters mostly, and to be mindful when you're using them, you use them when you're rendering something. That's most of the case when you will be using any variables on React, for example. And let's go for our last one. There is nothing to see a lot, so it just that we're not, we have the clean code without our const bar, that bar that it has been used here. But the problem is, if you understood, it's about working, for example, with ESLint. When you wanted to refactor the code and do that manually, the problem is that people can forget something, misread, or something else. But ESLint, never. Try base all of your application from scratch on ESLint. Discover which patterns are good for your specific application. If you're working on Swatel, you're working on Vue, you're working on React, it doesn't matter. Just discover what is crucial and good for working with your specific framework and code base, and base that application on ESLint at once, because it's important. It will make your code clean, consistent, it will be really working good on this, and I will even say you an example that we have been migrating an application, and thanks for ESLint, we have seen the problems when we just connected one of the modules when we have been migrating, and it have been instantly said, come on, you have a problem in 5 files in different parts of your applications. And in these files, you cannot use, for example, template, you cannot use the slotting, you cannot use, for example, use state method or something else. It doesn't matter what has been there, but that was the problem. And also there was a problem when we have been working with styles, and the styles from the parent have been, before that, they have been putting into the children component easily. At once, it was the basic of that framework, but after the update, it's not, and you should manually write which style should go to the deep method, and thanks for ESLint, we have been found 3,000 examples where we should change that, and 1,000 of them could be auto-completed. So ESLint is crucial to work here. And also when you have a team of the team that is working with this specific application, it will help to work on the one way of look of your application. So if you're using, for example, double quotes, it will be everywhere. It will auto change single quotes. If you are using, for example, space between round to square object to brackets, it will auto-complete the things. So it will then make your code all look at once in one flow, and it will be much easier to find than some differences. So use ESLint, please. Yes, we're here. We're on the Script.js example. And that's not the easiest way to check, not all of them examples, but some of the even other examples that have been working, that could work here. You can check it out by yourself just to make the snippets. Right now I'm working on to create something better than just GitHub repository for each video, so hopes that I will be able to show all that content for you later on. So that's what we have: immutability, tune signals, and let's run this specific application. So we're going to use DSRC, and we're writing node script.js, and we have three things. No, a couple. Trying, paid, changed, count, batch, and cache. Some important patterns and anti-patterns to use. So, for example, trying the first time. It's the way when we're working with our from globals to the factory method. So you know what? I'll show you a couple of examples, like just to you to understand some things. But most of them, try to discover them by yourself and write in the comments down below. And if you would like to, if there will be a lot of the requests, we'll be able to discover all that code together. Yeah, because some of the things that are just quite easy to say how to work. For example, the mapping that we have been seeing, the changing of the some things. One sec. Yeah, for example, aborting our request that we have been trying to create. For example, working with search method that is based on the abort one. And for example, here we're searching this will be aborted, we'll have error based, and this one will work fine. So it's not so important. The thing that I want to show you is just quite interesting. It's batching, because we have been talking about that, but that's quite important here. It's to cache the things. So here you can see something like the network request, and the idea here is quite easy. So some of the things based on the web can be automatically cached, for example, some images, etc., etc., etc. But some not. And for example, when you're getting requests from your backend stuff, and for example, to re-render the list of employees, for example. And how does it re-rendering? You're just adding a new user. It has been sorted to some manipulations on the backend, and you should to check the new list. What you can do, you can cache what you already have. For example, you can cache 100 employers. When a new employer is been added, and for example, based on that information, another employee can have changes or something like that, you can have ID for changes. What it can be? It can be, it's good if it's generated on the backend as like something like the token of the changes. It just takes the changes that are based on the user information. for specific one, puts that like ID, for example, and if that ID has been changed, it is updated on the main list. And all of the other IDs that are not been changed, so it means that the user has been the same as it was firstly loaded. It will help you, for example, here you can see something you have been working for 81 milliseconds, then another cached one for 0.01 milliseconds. What does it mean? That cached data are working much faster. And if you, for example, have that list of the users and you're fetching every time, or for example, you have a team, for example, you're creating the web cabinet of video editing and you have the team and you can refresh your users every 5 seconds, for example, or you're working with something better when you're working with WebSockets and it can be automatically taking that information. The problem is that you can still re-render all of your elements. And here's the thing that some frameworks, they're working instantly, they're checking what has been changed and what not, and they're not changing that. But if you should do that manually, check your framework if it works with caching, but if it's not, probably you should create the cache manually. So you're creating the list, and if the new users that have been requested are not in that list or something have been changed, for example, based on ID, it will be fast comparing, because if you have a lot of the fields, checking all of the fields, if that have been changed, it can be quite long and the costly process. So based on the ID, and if ID have, not ID like change ID, like token ID, something like that for the specific user. So it will just say, hey, you have, for example, the user that have been working before, but it has been changed something. So just re-render that based on what we have taken from our network. As remember, most of frameworks, they're working right now in this way, but it's also the good way to double check that, and especially if you have something based on the JavaScript, some JavaScript native components, these are the crucial things to double check, because as you can see, based on the cache, it will much faster working with your code. Thanks everyone for watching this video. I hope that you understood which is anti-patterns on the JavaScript right now, what is better to write. Please write down on your on the comments below about the script.js. Did you realize how to work with that? Do you want it to have the whole list of working changes with that? And also check the video that we have been doing before about patterns of the JavaScript. It's based on basically that video, so but a little bit different approach. So hope that you like that, and wishing to see you in the next videos. Thanks everyone. Bye.